Welcome again to Profiles on Nantucket Community Television, Channel 18. I'm Charley Walters. My guest today is Peter Brace. A lot of you know him from many things he has done, and we'll get to all of those later in the show. But I asked him to come on to talk about something you may not know he does. He is a beekeeper. He's going to explain to us what that means and what that means on Nantucket in particular. Peter, thank you.
My pleasure, Charlie.
A stupid question, but for some people who may not know, exactly what is beekeeping?
Well, from my perspective, beekeeping is the keeping of colonies of bees in wooden boxes or plastic boxes for the purposes of the bees creating honey, making honey, and various other products like pollen, propolis, and wax. For me, it's a partial living. Yeah.
And when you say you keep them in boxes, what do those boxes look like? How big are they?
What are they like? Maybe 20 inches tall, maybe 19 inches wide. They're usually, pine boxes, 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch thick. There are 10 frames. When I say frames, these are the frames in which the bees build their comb to lay their eggs that will create the brood nest, the worker bees, and then also combs up above where they will place the honey.
These boxes can contain how many bees?
Well, if you're starting a new hive, you're probably starting with about 10,000 bees. They can get up.
10,000. You're starting with 10,000.
Yeah, you actually get the bees in the mail in a little package, a little bit taller than a shoebox with screening on the walls and the sides, and you get about 3 pounds of bees, which is about 10,000 bees. And then in the summertime, when they're at capacity in July, it could be 30, 40, 50,000 bees in the hive, depending how well the queen is doing.
And when you start, you just put them in the mail or UPS or FedEx or whatever, and that's not a problem, I guess.
Yeah, there's 2 ways. You get them as a package of 3 pounds of bees, which is the bees and then a queen in her own little cage. They've been raised. The bees that are in the package, the worker bees, have been raised somewhere down south or out in California. So when they're loaded to be shipped to the beekeepers, they are dumped into one of these packages, and then a queen that's been raised separately is put into the package. Bees communicate by pheromones, and so unless the queen was a part of that original hive where the workers were being raised, you take a queen that they don't know and put it into the hive, they'll kill it. So she's in a little cage. Then there's a nucleus, and a nucleus will be a box, either that plastic cardboard stuff or 1/4 inch plywood with 5 or 6 frames hanging in it, and there'll be probably 3 frames of brood, which is capped brood, which is baby bees maturing to become worker bees, and then you'll have a frame of honey and a frame of pollen, and the queen is part of that. So she started originally with this group, and those get shipped. Usually, what happens is you get a call, or you get an email from the company you bought them from, saying we shipped your bees. They'll be there on this date. So then you go down to the annex on Old South Road and tell the ladies there, I get bees coming, and they're all used to it. And you go and pick them up. They'll call you and say your bees are here. Or there's a guy here named Jim Gross, and Jim Gross is our sort of longest beekeeper on the island. Presumably the most knowledgeable, although people will say to you, the more you read and watch about beekeeping, the less you know. So for I don't know how many years, Jim has been organizing, taking orders for bees and then buying them from a supplier off island and then somebody goes off island and gets those bees. And for the last 7 years, it's been me in my van. So I go to a place. For the last 3 years, it's been East Hampton, Massachusetts. I go up there and load the bees into the van in their nukes and in their packages, and I drive down and bring them back to Nantucket.
And when they're being transported, either in a van or in a package, are they making a racket in the process?
It's kind of a low hum. They generally in the hive keep the hive at around 94 degrees. In the summertime, they'll try and keep it a little bit lower, but right now the bees that are alive in their hives are keeping it warm. So
On their own, they're keeping it warm.
they sort of dislocate their wing muscles from their wings and then vibrate those muscles, and that generates heat, and that keeps the bees warm. So in the van, when you have, like for instance, last year we had 50 nukes and 50 packages. You've got to keep the air conditioning blasting. You have to keep the windows wide open, so when you're going down the highway, the cool air is keeping them cool.
Now, how far north can someone be a beekeeper? I mean, does Greenland have beekeepers? Really?
Yeah.
And this is because, in part anyway, because they generate so much heat on their own?
Yeah, I mean, plus you'll see pictures of bees, hives in places where it's very snowy, coated in snow, and the snow acts as an insulator. And a lot of us here on Nantucket insulate our hives. They say, whoever they are, the knowledgeable beekeeper people in the country, they say that in the Northeast, your hive should have 60 pounds of honey for the hives to make it through the winter. So if you insulate your hives, you can bring that number down to 20 or 30 pounds.
Now, is it just one species of bee that we're talking about here, or are there all different kinds of honeybees?
Well, there's different, it's Apis flora, but there are different strains. So and then each strain has different qualities that you like as a beekeeper. So beginners are sort of guided toward getting Italian bees because they're gentle and they have good honey production. But lately we've been getting, there's the New World Carniolans from, Eastern Europe, and they are known to be disease resistant, to bring up the brood very quickly, to produce a lot of honey, to then regulate the bees, the population going into the fall, which is key because you don't want a huge population going into the winter and not enough honey. So, bees only live 45 to, maybe 45 days. So the queen's constantly laying eggs, up to 2,000 a day, to keep the numbers of bees up. And then you're coming into the fall, she's laying eggs that will be bees that live 120 to 150 days to make it through the winter, to keep the hive ready for spring when the new bees will be coming along. And then there are these Russian bees that we've been getting lately from the place in East Hampton. And they're supposed to have all the traits that we like about bees, plus they're hygienic, which means they groom each other.
Which most bees don't, I'm assuming.
Most bees don't.
I'm inferring.
And it's a good thing because there's a pest that we all have to deal with called a varroa mite. And they pick the mites off of each other, supposedly, or I've seen it. And the mites basically drill inside to the bees and eat what are known as fat bodies, which are inside the bees. And the fat bodies are stores of fat, protein that the bees need to survive. Also, they will eat out their liver. So over time, slowly kill the bees.
Since we're talking about different kinds of bees, this is a good time for me to ask you about killer bees. Do they fit into this at all?
Well, I think you're probably talking about Africanized bees.
Yes.
And you can't buy Africanized bees. So, I know they're here in this country. Probably, I don't know enough about it, but I'm guessing they're probably wild bees living in trees or whatever. Then there was the big hoopla over the last couple of years, the Asian giant hornets.
Yeah.
And all the beekeepers were nervous because those hornets go into beehives and just kill everything. They kill all the bees and take all the honey. I believe that's isolated up in the Pacific Northwest, and it's not here.
Do killer bees produce honey?
Yeah.
They do.
Yeah, I mean, Africanized bees, they're honey bees. They're just much more aggressive.
So I'm assuming nobody has hives of Africanized bees?
Not that I know of. I mean, there's enough, the longer you keep bees, the more used to it you get. I'd say that there are more hobbyists with 1 to 3 hives out here that aren't always the most experienced. So there's more of those type of people out here than there are people who are trying to make money at it. So I don't see those people ordering bees that are going to be hard to work with. They've done their research. They know which ones they want to get, and they get them. So
usually if you see a beekeeper on TV or a photograph or whatever, they have a somewhat elaborate costume on.
yeah.
Is that necessary
Well,
or just advisable?
I say it is. People like Jim Gross, a guy, our main guy who knows the most about beekeeping out here, been keeping him the longest. You'll see Jim in, pants with a short sleeve shirt and just the veil, which is the helmet,
Yeah.
and then has the netting all around his face, working on his hives with his sleeves rolled up, because he has developed a comfort level where he's very calm, and the bees are like children and pets. They can sense when something's up. They can get when you're sad. They can get when you're aggressive. And the bees, I don't know if the bees can sense when you're sad, but they can certainly tell when something's off. And so when you're so comfortable keeping bees and working in a hive that you don't need to wear your gloves, you might get stung a few times, but you've been stung so many times that it's no big deal. So that's the extreme, don't need any gear type of person. But the rest of us, bees don't like sweat. They don't like perfume or colognes or any other scents that interferes with their communications. So,
Well, if they smell sweat, what do? They get...
well, they can get a little agitated, or if you drip sweat on them like I do.
So I assume you've been stung many times by this point?
It stung 2 years ago at Sustainable Nantucket Farm. I must have got stung like 30 or 40 times, mostly on my head and my neck. And I'm used to it, but it's still not much fun.
Not all at the same time.
All at the same time.
All at the same time.
Yeah.
And you didn't have to go to the hospital or anything?
Nope, not swimming. So, for me anyway, I've got a full suit, which is, it's a one piece, so it's pants, torso, arms. I wear gloves. I have a helmet, or a veil attached to my suit. And that gives me my comfort level. And I finally figured out that the sweat thing is solved by getting a nice terry cloth headband, soak up the sweat. And I've been keeping bees now for, this year will make 10 years. And so I'm pretty much used to it. Been stung. It's not the way I explain it to new beekeepers is it's not the pain of the sting, because it's only a little bit worse than a mosquito bite or a greenhead or something like that. It's the fact that this thing that you can really see the bee coming at you and stinging you, and it's the sort of panic that you get, you're getting stung.
Natural human reaction.
Right. You can get stung on purpose because the bee venom is supposedly good for your joints. So if you call him, Jim Gross will sting you in your joints that are achy, and it'll help.
That's fascinating. I don't know if I want to do that, but...
Well, it takes away the random scariness of a whole bunch of insects converging on you to, him just taking a bee and pushing it, and you feel the pinch, and then it's over, and so.
I know this depends on how many hives a person has, but how much work is involved here?
If you're keeping 1 or 2 hives, you know, the springtime is the most work, I think, because you need to check the hives to make sure that the queen is building up a lot of brood, to make sure that the queen is actually laying eggs, to check.
Is that every day?
No, maybe every 5 to 7 days.
And as we're taping this, we're in late January. How often do you check now?
Maybe every 10 days to 2 weeks, I go to the hives and listen. I put my ear up to the hive, and if I hear bees buzzing, and I'm happy because that means there's a lot of bees, and I have all my hives insulated. So if I can hear them through the insulation,
That's a lot of noise.
that's a lot of noise, and that's a lot of bees, and they're doing good.
So you can go away for a week or 10 days right now,
Yeah,
and it's not a problem.
yeah,
But do you have people check on the bees whenever you're gone?
yeah. I mean, like if I go away in the summertime, I've got several people who are beekeepers who aren't keeping bees will check on my hives for me.
So it's really pretty simple.
Well, I mean,
Unless there's a problem.
yeah, it's not simple. You know, you're tending to them. You know, you've spent either this year the cost for a nuke is $255, and the cost for a package is $175. So you've spent that money. You bought that gear. You have the suit, and if you're like me, who operates a lot of hives, I care for 4 different people's hives, 4 in Walwinnet, 4 on the cliff, 2 my neighbor, Jim Proman, the sheriff, and 2 others on Lily Street. So all of that's my responsibility to make sure that those bees make it till the springtime and make it through the spring and the summer and produce honey. So it's an investment. So you're tending them all the time. You're worrying about them. And then in the summertime, if everybody did well and they produced a lot of brood and they're starting to bring in honey, then you take the feed away that you're feeding them and just let them go. And once they've filled up their top 2 boxes, you know, the deeper boxes are known as brood boxes or deeps, in which the brood are. Once they've, you know, put a lot of honey in the top deep, then you put a super on, which is a shallower box, which has shallower frames, and that's where they put the excess honey. The honey that they put in the top deep is the honey they'll have for the winter, and the honey up here, no matter how high it goes, is the honey you'll take in the fall. So your job now is to keep checking the supers to make sure that they always have plenty of room. If they sense they don't have enough room, they might swarm. They might decide there's not enough room here. We're going to go inside of that dryer vent at Charley Walters' house that we saw a hole in, and we're going to set up in that dryer. Or we're going to go.
If that happens, I'll call Peter Brace immediately.
Yep, I'm going to go inside that soffit where there was a hole and set up in there. Or so you're making sure they have enough space. You put on another super. Some people advise you put on 2 supers at a time so they don't feel cramped, even if they're not going to fill it. So that's in the early summer, that's like every 7 to 10 days you're checking. And if that's just your 2 hives in your backyard, then no big deal. But I've got my 4 clients, let's see, that's 8, 10, 12, plus my 7 hives makes 19 hives. So you're going around and checking all those hives to make sure that everybody's okay and give them what they need. And then in the fall, when it's time to harvest, it's a lot of work taking the supers off and harvesting the honey. So it's a lot of work.
How often do you harvest?
There's a couple of schools of thought on that, and I used to just harvest in August, in the middle of August, so I could get the nice light summer honey that everybody likes, and then hope that I get the dark honey, which is produced by a lot of Japanese knotweed and the 14 or so varieties of goldenrod out here, and thistles and asters and clematis. And but I've been reading a lot lately, over the last few years, about how when you take the honey in the springtime or in the in August, it's kind of like some people have a Christmas fund that they put money into all year long, and that's the money they're going to spend on the holidays. And so you put that money away, or they have money that they put away that they're going to spend in the wintertime because they're not going to have as much work. And the bees are like that. They put that honey in that top deep, 60 pounds of it maybe, because they know they're going to need that for the winter. So they rely on that. They're like, take that out of the equation, we're good, that's over there. Now we're building this extra. But they also draw from the extra to feed bees that are new and newly born. But if you come along and take that mid-August, everything they created from spring until mid-August or whatever, then they're like, holy crap, we don't have our reserves anymore. We don't have our operating budget, I guess, whatever. We got this over here, but that's for the winter. And so I've read a lot about how the queen will just slow down production of bees once they realize they don't have enough honey. I'm sure there are beekeepers watching me right now saying, oh, no, that's not true. But I've read a lot, and I've talked to local experts, people smarter than me here in beekeeping, and it seems to be the consensus. So...
Well, let me stop you there. When there's not enough, the queen cuts back on production?
Yeah.
That's counterintuitive in a way.
Yeah, it is. But it interrupts the flow of everything. And so the last 2 seasons, what I've done is just wait till the very end, meaning usually middle of October for my bees.
And then how much do you take?
I'll take everything that's above the deeps. I'll see what's in the deeps, and almost always they're full. And there's winter feed you can give them, so I'll just take everything that's above. Jim Perlman, my neighbor, this past year, he got 9 supers full of honey. There are only 8 frame boxes, but still, he must have gotten like 300 pounds. It's crazy how much honey he got. And both hives had enough honey to make it through the winter. Yeah.
So if you're selling the honey, I don't mean you personally, if one is selling the honey, it can be a profitable enterprise if you know what you're doing.
I had an edge in that my dad kept bees for 30 years. And in 2013, a friend of mine, Sunny Daly, was getting into beekeeping because Sam Slozak was giving her some boxes, and she's like, we should form this group to support other beekeepers. We formed a very loose group called Backyard Beekeepers, a lowercase b and then ACK capitalized. And we used to meet every second Sunday in the month, and talk about bees, and Jim would sort of be there to help us out, and we do sort of a little potluck. And my dad at that time was all done keeping bees and said, take whatever you want. So I took a lot of equipment, and then when he passed away in 2014, I took everything else that was really good that I knew I needed, and it helped me, because bee equipment can run you. I certainly spent a lot of money on the whole thing, but once you have the boxes, then in the complete hive, you're only really replacing frames. And if bees die, then you're replacing that colony the next year. It's all tied together. If you become a better beekeeper, you can keep your bees alive longer and longer, and only ever have to replace the queen, because they only last a couple of years.
How is beekeeping on Nantucket different from beekeeping in wherever?
Well, we don't have bears. We don't have raccoons. We don't have a lot of the middle mammals they have on the mainland, so no bears, coyotes, foxes, raccoons, possums,
Do deer like the...
Porcupines, no, deer is a vegetarian. They only eat. That's why the deer are on your lawn in the springtime, because their lawn's green before the moors are.
It ain't just the springtime.
Right. But all those animals I just said, they could, maybe getting some of them wrong, but definitely bears, scavengers like coyotes can knock over hives. Also, we don't have large monoculture farms here that spray lots of pesticides. And if you ask them, the farms will tell you this is when we're going to spray, so you can close your hive up for that 24-hour period. So we're kind of isolated out here, which is great. But we do have, our nasty cold spring being about a month behind the mainland, so it's colder here.
Yeah.
So there's no flowers. You're waiting for the dandelions. That's the first thing they go on. Maybe if there are any snowdrops left. And then eventually, Japanese crabapple or Japanese apple, what is it? Japanese cherry, apple trees, multiflora rose, red maples.
Well, given their ability to move around, how do you know you're not going to lose them all?
Because they're going to always go back to the queen. They're always going to go back to their hive. They are, it's a community. They are like, they're like ants. They live communally. They're all contributing to they only fly 1.5 miles at most to go and get the forage. So,
And that's really with no exceptions.
I'm sure there's some that push the limit.
But not an important amount.
The thing is, the bees have different duties after they come out of after they hatch. They start out as nurse bees, taking care of new bees coming out, and they may also be at the entrance to the hive as guard bees or bees that fan the air into the hive to create the circulation. The last duty that a bee has before it dies is to become a field bee, which means to fly out and get nectar, get pollen, get water, get propolis. Propolis is the resinous material that sticks a leaf to the twig of a tree or a bush. And they use that with their wax that they create to sort of create a caulk to seal up the hive and make structural comb. So the last thing they're doing is flying out to get honey. Their wings are pretty ragged by then, or they get picked off by a bird, various birds that like them. So, we're lucky out here in certain ways, but then unlucky in others.
Are there parts of the world where beekeeping is more popular for whatever reason?
Or it's warmer, down south.
There are more beekeepers per capita, if you will?
Our bees come from either Georgia. One year they came from Mississippi. So there are huge bee growing farms down there that produce the nukes and produce the packages that are then shipped up here to us.
Putting aside the hives, the number of bees in hives on Nantucket, are there more bees in the wild, fewer bees in the wild?
There are hundreds and hundreds of pollinating insects, of bees that are all about themselves and not about us. There are lots of pollinator insects here that are keyed to a certain flower. Their life cycle is dictated by when the flower blossoms. There are bumblebees. The cranberry bogs, the Nantucket Conservation Foundation used to use boxes of bumblebees to help the bees, help pollinate the bogs, because bumblebees don't make a whole ton of honey.
But now one reads from time to time that the bee population worldwide is in trouble of some sort. How much trouble, for one thing, and on Nantucket I guess that's not a problem on Nantucket?
Nantucket, with the exception of downtown, isn't known for its big trees. And a tree is a place where a bee is likely to live, inside of, or on the overhang of a cliff. something like that, which we don't really have except along the shore. So bees will swarm if if you're not taking care of your hive well. If they don't like a queen that they have, they might decide to go and live somewhere else, and that somewhere else could be in a tree. I've heard of some cavities in trees in the state forest off of Lover's Lane that had, in years past, have had wild swarms of bees living in them. And Jim Gross mentioned a tree that has a big cavity somewhere in Wisconsin, although he won't tell me where it is, that always produces a swarm. There was, for the longest time, a colony of bees living at the interface of the Quaker Meeting House and the NHA's, the Nantucket Historical Association's research library. And you could go and stand at a certain place and look up and see the bees coming out. They lived there, I don't know, for a decade maybe. And I think Jim told me that the NHA didn't want to, get them out of there because they didn't want to have to do any work on the meeting house, which is an original structure, and they didn't want to open it up and rip out all the bees. You get a swarm of bees that sets up inside your house and amongst the framing. And the only way to do the job is to first get all the comb and honey and bees and everything out of there, and then remove every timber that had comb on it, because it has a smell to it, which if you don't remove it, you'll attract other bees. And so there isn't really a place for them to go and live. They're more apt to go into an opening in your house. So there isn't a wild population of Apis flora living on Nantucket that I know of.
Well, if you're walking in the state forest and you see a swarm, or not in any place on Nantucket or elsewhere, and you see a swarm, a lot of people are going to panic when they see that, but I gather that's not necessary.
Bees will, when they've decided to swarm, they'll make a queen, which is another question, but they'll make a queen, and then when it's time to swarm and go, they'll suck up all the honey they possibly can in their bellies and take off. And what you're most likely to see, if you don't see the bees flying all around, so many bees, is you'll see a ball of bees hanging from a house or a structure, and anything, something like a medicine ball or a basketball. And inside in the middle is the queen that they're protecting. And then they've sent out scouts to look for a place to go. Meanwhile, they're full of honey. So their bodies can't articulate to sting you. So it's the most safe time to be around bees.
So it's safe, but obviously you don't want to do something stupid like throw a stick at the swarm.
They'll just drop to the ground. They're not, I'm serious, they can't really sting you. They can't, if you take, a whole bunch of shirts and pillows and stuff them under your shirt, see if you can touch your toes or your knees at all. And that's what it is. Their bodies are bloated. They're literally bloated with honey, so they can't move. They're flying, hopefully, to a place where they're going to set up, and then they're going to build the comb as fast as they can, put the honey in it, then they'll have something to eat, and then they'll start going out and getting nectar to make the honey. And so it's the least dangerous time. I personally wouldn't go into a swarm waving my hands around and making noise, but you could be within it and they don't care about you.
Or is a human presence disruptive even though they're not going to hurt you? Are you interfering with the process?
They don't really care about you. They're looking for a place to go. So they're already disturbed. Yes, it's a possibility you could get stung, but I've been around a lot of them and they're just not. You're just another thing. You're not in their way,
I want to ask you about beekeeping on Nantucket in general. Is there more of it? Do you foresee more of it developing down here?
Well, 4 years ago, Sustainable Nantucket asked me to kind of start a beekeeping program at their community farm institute out on Hummock Pond Road where the farm stand is. And so what I did was, whenever it was I started, I did an introduction to beekeeping talk at the farm and drew in a bunch of people there were eight people, and I found beekeepers in our community, in our backyard beekeepers, to mentor them over a full season, full year of beekeeping. And then I took a few of those people on myself. And we did that every year except for last year, and got, this past fall we didn't do an introduction to beekeeping. We were kind of trying to decide at the farm how many hives we wanted. There were issues of people who worked at the various small farms on that farm getting stung because there were bees that were placed too close to where the fields were. So I decided we'll take a year when we won't do it. And the number of beekeepers went down. But I did train up 2 people last season, the spring of 2022 all the way until basically this coming spring. So that's a way that new people are getting into it. And then, I wouldn't say that there are just tons of people, scores, which is 20, or even tens of people getting into it every single year. It's expensive, The nukes are $255, the packages are $175. Whichever way you go, then you've got to buy all the gear plus a suit. You've got to find an extractor to extract the honey. You've got to have bottles. You've got to create a label. It's a thing to get going. So.
Well, it is a lot of work. It's more work than I would have thought, but it's great that there's more interest. I mean, it's just the kind of thing you'd want to see increased interest with in a place like Nantucket.
Well, there's, the number that I always heard tossed around a lot was, there's 60, 70 beekeepers here, but I think it's more like 40 or 50, I think.
Well, that's a lot, which sounds great to me.
There are all those, hobbyists, 1 to 3 hives, and then there's people like myself and my friend Anton and Jim Gross and I'm trying to think who else. Oh, David Hitchcock. Mm-hmm. He had a contract with the Conservation Foundation to keep his hives out at windswept cranberry bog when they were farming cranberries out there. And, they got pollination help with the cranberry plants and he got honey. I still think he has 30 hives out there, even though they're not farming cranberries out there anymore. Mm-hmm. So I'd say there's under 10 larger beekeepers, and then the rest of them are all people who just, I just want my honey. So.
As I mentioned at the start of the show, beekeeping is far from the only thing you do. So I want to talk a little bit about the other things you do. Do you want to start with SHAB? Tell us what that is and what you do. I'm on the Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board. I'm coming to the end of my 3rd term with SHAB. We call it SHAB, but the true name is Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board, and I'm the secretary. And we are advising the Board of Selectmen, the Select Board, on all matters shellfish and fishing and harbor. And that's a town board. That's not a.
It's a town board.
Yeah.
Yep.
Nantucket Walkabout.
Was a business I started in 2015, an outgrowth of my writing for the Nantucket Beacon and the Nantucket Independent and Nantucket Magazine, as an environmental reporter, and also writing the books, Walking Nantucket, A Walker's Guide to Nantucket on Foot, and Nantucket, A Natural History. I was doing the Nantucket Historical Association's Food for Thought talk that they have at the museum in the off-season, and that was October of, 2012. I was stumping for my natural history book, and 82 people. It was a lot of people. And at the end, I was selling books and signing them in their gift shop, and a woman came up to me and said, I'm only here every couple of years, but maybe when I come back, you'll be taking people on walks and telling them about natural history. And then the Independent had shut down, 2 years prior, and I was coming to the end of being able to collect unemployment, and I was doing a million little jobs to try and stay under the amount that they let you make. And so I wasn't doing so well, and I thought, that sounds cool, So it took me a couple of years to get it off the ground, but, this will be my 8th season guiding people.
Do you do it at all in the wintertime,
I have,
if there's demand?
I say that I'm open year-round. I am. I have hikes on my hike calendar that you can go and book. But, you know, it's usually not until March when I get them. And then all the way until, you know, middle of December, maybe.
I also have in my notes, Adjunct Professor at UMass. Tell us about that.
That would have been 2014 and 2015, and the UMass Boston, the University of Massachusetts at Boston campus, which is the owner of the UMass Field Station, out at 180 Pulpus Road. That field station sits on 110 acres of Nantucket Conservation Foundation land. And they used to have, I think they still have it, they just haven't got anybody to sign up for it lately, what's known as the Nantucket semester, where you would come down here as a student in the School for the Environment at UMass Boston and live at the field station at their dorms. And you would have a Nantucket-centric curriculum and take 4 courses, one at a time. So 3.5 weeks is one course, a semester's worth of work in one course, and an intensive. And all the while, over that spring semester, you would be working on some sort of research project, a study in the biological world on Nantucket. And so that wasn't me. I would teach a class called Nantucket Natural History, based on my book. So much fun.
You've done a lot of things, and the leitmotif, if you will, is Nantucket as a place of, well, natural history, your book, natural beauty, et cetera, ecology. So that's the through line for all the things you just mentioned.
I've reinvented myself so many different times. I've been a doorman at various places around the island. I worked for Cape Cod Express, delivering packages. For 3.5 years, I did taxes for H&R Block. I landscaped and gardened, and you know, the very undercurrent is that I love living here, and I don't want to go. I now own a house here. I got very lucky and got a housing covenant house. So it's more of, for me, it's quality of life and this really strong community of my friends that are here, that, you know, you do what you got to do to stay here. I had this conversation with a friend of mine over and over in the summertime. I volunteer at the farmer's market downtown for the last 15 years. And I always tell her, you know, there's tons of people here that are wealthy by money, but I think that everybody that lives here is wealthy, just by virtue of the fact that you get to live here.
We are all lucky to live here. Sometimes, maybe in August, it doesn't feel that way, but we are lucky to live here, no question.
And now it's January, and it's going to be February in a little bit, and it's one of my favorite months of the year. It's it's the quietest, I think, and I look forward to it.
I do too. I do too. Peter Brace, thank you for joining me today and telling us about beekeeping, which is something I dare say most people watching this show will know nothing about, but they know a lot about it now. So thanks for coming into the studio.
It was great. My pleasure, Charlie.
For Nantucket Community Television, Channel 18, this is Charley Walters on Profiles. Thanks for tuning in. Please tune in again.